Kavekro, the hulking man, shook the frail man in his clutches.
I will not ask again,
Kavekro bellowed as his long black mane danced in the wind. He squeezed tighter around the thin man's throat. I've already told you, the frail man squeaked. I have no daughters. In the struggle, a table, where the little man was sitting moments before enjoying his afternoon tea and bread, crashed onto the stone floor of the home. Kavekro gripped the brittle man's throat tighter until there was a sharp pop, and the man's body fell to the cold stone floor like crumpled parchment. The killer's two ashen-skinned companions slinked from the shadows and followed Kavekro from the small stone abode to the yard. General Kavekro, one asked, as the other grabbed the fallen bread from the floor and took a sizable bite. Perhaps he was telling the truth. Kavekro spat at the body and stretched his fingers as a sick smile snaked up the corner of his mouth.
This Aprasian waste of skin, before perishing, was kind enough to inform me there was but one more farm ahead.
He squinted as he glanced up the way.
The last one.
What if we don't find what the Veer is looking for?
Then we tell my father that he should stop believing in the Hazel, don't we?
Kavekro hissed. I'm not telling him that, Kavekro's companion responded, and the very thought turned his insides cold.
Just get on with burning this place down,
Kavekro said.
Leave the thinking to me.
A similar stone dwelling in the mountains, not far away, rested on a cliff's edge. From the vast acreage, steel spires, lightning rods between 200 and 400 feet tall, rose to the heavens, their tops obscured by a blanket of fog. This was a home to lightning farmers. With an audible clang, Matre threw a wooden spoon into a dirty sink, stuck her head out the kitchen window, and called to the mountainside. Amaral, dinner is almost ready. After a few minutes and a few more cries to the mountainside by her mother, the girl entered the house, flushed red. She glanced at her father, Pano, who peered over his glasses. I was running after a family of ratros and lost all track of time, the girl said as she twirled into her seat at an old wooden table. Pano smirked.
You catch any?
Amaral's pale blue eyes lowered. It got away and was probably too small anyway, so I would have let it go. Her mother handed her a plate with a few purple peas, a leaf of white lettuce, and a piece of thinly sliced potato. With her fork, the young girl chased the peas around the plate. Don't sulk, her father said. She crushed a few peas with the back of her fork, stuffed them in her mouth, and chewed ferociously. I'm not, Pa. She brushed white blonde hair from her eyes and smirked.
We are trying the best we can with our limited resources.
Amaral opened her eyes wide. I went to the bluff today and saw that the neighbors had taken down all their rods. She paused and glanced at her father, her eyes moist. That means...
We're the last lightning farm in Aprasi,
her father said.
This is not a surprising development, Amaral. We haven't had a storm harvest in months. It's a complete energy drought.
Pano tapped his pencil on his book.
It's just a matter of time before.
No, Pa. We can't retire. There's a storm coming. I can feel it. I really can, Amaral said. Haven't you heard?
That there's always a calm before the storm?
Pano dropped his head and snorted.
This calm has been a wee bit lengthy, don't you think?
Amaral played with her food some more. They were having a bonfire too, she said. Pano forced a smile, and Matre turned around and gave Pano a knowing glance. Their daughter finished her meal and slumped out of the room as her parents met in the modest kitchen. Matre grabbed her husband of 20 years by the shoulders as he closed his book on the counter. That bad, she asked.
I've crunched the numbers all evening.
Pano pinched the bridge of his nose.
We've got 11 lightning bottles left. If we ration it well, we can make it a month, perhaps 2, but...
Don't even say his name, Matre hissed.
We will probably have to sell the property to Murchell.
Matre closed her arms. We're not selling, especially not to Murchell. He's taking advantage of the times and profiting from the war.
Admit it, he made us a pretty decent offer,
Pa said. No, he can take his offer, and they both made eye contact with Amaral simultaneously. When her parents stammered for a response, Amaral said, I don't know why you guys always have to treat me like a baby. I'm 12 years old. I should know what's going on around here. Paul cupped his weathered hands together.
We're sorry, Am. We just thought you would be too sensitive about it.
Sensitive? The girl raised a fist in the air. I've got more knuckles than most of the boys in town. She drove her fists into her hips. I can handle it.
I know, Am,
Paul said with a smirk.
I know.
I just wish you would trust me that a storm is coming, Amaral said as she peered out the window at the mountainside. I can feel it. She placed a hand on her stomach. Have I ever been wrong? Ma smiled. What's it feel like? Emerald closed her eyes and pressed against her stomach. It's a weird feeling in my gut, she said. A hollow, almost hungry feeling rises through my body. Ma raised an eyebrow. Really? Crash. A man burst through the door, and a plume of dust obscured him as he leaned forward and almost fell before slamming a large, sweaty palm onto the dinner table. A plate fell to the floor and shattered. Before Pano, Matre, or Emerald could react, the man outstretched his hands to them.
Forgive me, citizens.
The Parisian family could finally fix their gaze on the man as he braced himself against a stool. He stooped over, clutching his left shoulder, blood leaking through his taut fingers. Ma pushed the chair underneath him and helped him sit. The man sighed and took a seat.
I come in peace. I am a soldier of Garoth,
He said.
My men and I were attacked, ambushed, by Zovelkin, not far from here.
When Emerald's parents heard what he said, their eyes grew wide. Zovelkin? An elaborately crafted bronze crest on the heart of the uniform was in the traditional orange color of the Garoth. The man gave his uniform a gentle tug. It doesn't fit, Emerald mused to herself. One of their blades has cut you. Who knows what poisons they've got nowadays? You need a bandage, Matre said as she hurried to the bathing room and rummaged around. I think we've got ointment in here someplace.
Not to worry, good citizens. The Zovelkin aren't too tough, and the cut isn't too bad.
Pano handed the man a plate of leftovers.
How many were in your party?
He asked, his voice cracking. The uniformed man pushed the small portions aside and scrunched his face in disgust.
12. We were patrolling the Garoth-Aprasi border when they ambushed us. They took us completely by surprise.
The man dropped his brow.
We lost good men.
I heard the Salsinians had joined the alliance with Garoth, Emerald said, pumping her fist. When her father looked at her, his eyes darkened.
And how, I must ask, are you privy to this information?
The girl took a step back and bowed her head to her father. I'm sorry, Pa.
Have you been in town recently, using those energy-sucking news cauldrons again?
Her mother returned, carrying a large armful of bandages. It's amazing how much of this stuff we need around here, she said, as she glanced at her daughter. We've got ourselves a real tomboy on our hands. Likes to scrape her knees on the mountainside, chasing ratros and wickenogs. The man chuckled to himself.
Ratros and wickenogs, you say? If she isn't scared of those things, you guys have nothing to worry about. Zovelkin have nothing on those scabbing critters.
Ma bound the uniformed man's bicep with a bandage. Doesn't look like it's bleeding anymore, she said. The man jerked his arm away from her and finished wrapping. Emerald studied the soldier's face, angular and chiseled with dark, straight hair and piercing blue eyes. Her mother waved a hand in front of the girl's face. Am, don't you know it's impolite to stare? In a hurry, the man stood and grinned at the family.
I thank you, kind of Parisians, but I must be...
He turned away and gestured at the window.
Say, this isn't...
He snatched a handful of potato from the discarded plate, shoveled the food in his mouth, and chewed loudly.
A lightning farm?
Pano said, puffing out his chest.
Sure is. It's the last one in Aprasi as of today,
he added. The man stroked his chin.
I know this is asking a lot of you, but you wouldn't have...
He spat a potato chunk onto the ground and began picking at his teeth.
A few spare lightning bottles? I know it's a lot to ask in these trying times.
Emerald didn't trust this guy. Pa peered at Ma for a moment.
Well, I don't know how Garoth runs things, but here in Aprasi, the kingdom has rights to all bottles. They collect it, and we get a salary. It's a contract, and it cannot be broken.
Surely you know that a few bottles would do wonders for the Garoth cause.
The man paused and glanced out at the lightning rods on the family's property.
Oh yes, Aprasi is currently a neutral country, but as good people, you must know.
Pa smiled and nodded.
We are aware of who the good guys are, sir,
he said.
Our cellar is where we keep our bottles. We don't have a lot, but you can have a couple.
The man abruptly turned to the family.
I'm going to be needing them all,
the large man hissed. Emerald shrunk more into the corner.
The contract keeps us afloat right now,
Pa nodded.
We can't jeopardize it.
The large man sighed, his dark eyelids partially obscuring his eyes.
How rude of me.
He rubbed his chest.
I come into your home, nay, barge into your home, looking for a little help, and treat you this way.
He cleared his throat.
I've interrupted your lives enough. I will be going.
He glanced at Emerald.
Sorry for all the trouble I've caused you.
He turned to the door and left. However, Emerald had difficulty accepting the man's words as true. She could have sworn that he was smirking. The hulking man exited the home and plodded down the path away from them. Matre and Pano looked at each other, and they both softly nodded. The man's face turned, a sly smile appearing. The reopening door and approaching footsteps caught his attention. Swiftly, he pivoted to face Pano, his expression shifting to a stone-like mask, concealing his true feelings. The older man looked up at the massive soldier, who was easily 2 feet taller than him, and held out a woven bag in front of him. Pano didn't know why, but something had changed. The old man's hands shook as he held out the bag before him.
Our family would love to help the Garoth cause, good soldier.
Pano squeaked. He could barely get the words out. The man's meaty hands snatched the bag, and he peered inside. His hardened face, like a stone wall, glowed with a light blue reflection from the bottles. The man began to lick his lips, but slipped the appendage back into his mouth like a recoiling snake.
There's not a lot, but that's nearly all the bottles we've got,
added Pano. The soldier cleared his throat.
Garoth will know of your sacrifice.
The man turned and continued onward into the gloom of the mountain. On his broad shoulders, the bag appeared comically small. Emerald watched the exchange through a window. When her father walked back into the house, he smiled weakly at his daughter and patted the top of her head. She started to speak, but Pano cut her off and gestured.
I don't want to hear about it, Am. I don't wish to talk about it.
Pano's entire body shook, and he dropped into his chair and sighed. The girl's eyes welled with tears, and she shut them tight. What about us? She squeaked.
We must pray to the gods,
Pa said, sagging in his stool. The girl turned around and climbed the stairs, her calloused feet thundering against the wooden steps. In her room, Amaryl looked out the window into the darkness. She felt the cold slap her face as it swept in. An idea popped into her skull like a bolt of lightning. I'll follow him, she thought. She threw a well-worn coat on her petite frame and hurried back downstairs. While her mother washed dishes, her father dozed off in his stool and bent over crookedly. I'm just going outside real quick, Ma, the girl said as she exited the house. Her mother had no time to respond. Amaryl observed the large man's path and followed it. She had been navigating this rough terrain for so long that she had often felt she could do it with her eyes closed. Unfamiliar voices echoed off the mountainside, and Amaryl immediately ran into the nearby bushes for safety.
That's not a bad haul, Kavekro. That's more than we found.
One voice whined.
Aprasi is dry as a bone. There's no bolt anywhere,
another man said. A voice Amaryl recognized as the man from before declared.
Taking Prendeklo should be a breeze, he cackled. Volshevir will be pleased.
Amaryl felt a lump in her throat. She wished she hadn't been privy to this information. Prendeklo was the Aprasian capital. Volshevir was the Vir of Zovelka, the ruler, the tyrant. She struck a fist into the ground. The man that was in her home was indeed a Zovelkan. An impostor had duped her family. She opened the leaves around her like a curtain and peered out. 2 other men were with the man, wearing leather belts around their waists that held small guns, Zikars. They all drew their weapons on cue as Kavekro handed them one of Amaryl's family's hard-earned lightning bottles and screwed it into the bottom of the guns. The Zikars whirred to life with a magnificent glow and a crackling sound, which shook Amaryl to her core, and she made a quick dash for cover.
What do we do now that we're stocked up, General Kavekro?
One man asked as he aimed a Zikar at the mountainside.
I haven't used my gun in some time,
he cried.
I miss the sound it makes.
A raindrop hit Kavekro's broad forehead.
We wait.
There was a moment of silence.
What?
One of the 2 others asked.
You can't be serious.
Kavekro cleared his throat, then slammed a fist into the husk of a tree.
Are you not scabbing finished with sneaking around these parts?
He stretched out his fingers and his knuckles popped.
I want to strike down Prendeklo as bad as you guys,
he said.
But I want to do it in style.
So what's the plan?
One of his companions asked.
We set up camp just off this path.
What's so special about this place, Kavekro?
Their leader turned his head to the heavens.
A storm is brewing, boys.
His stone face cracked a menacing grin.
A mighty storm.
That was Amaryl's cue. She had to leave and tell Ma and Pa. Now. She took a long breath and exhaled. As she left, she disrupted the surrounding bushes, and the 3 men jerked their heads in her direction.
Ratro?
One of the Zovelkan asked as the girl disappeared. Kavekro squinted his eyes back up the path and ordered.
Get camp set up.
Rain fell, and in the far distance the faint, eerie rumble of thunder.